Everyone, I just wanted to walk through my rendering process that I've been using this year. There's basically been two types. This more content standalone, but nice lighting. And then my most recent one where I've kind of set up a little bit of a scene to give more depth and composition. So let's walk through those real quick. I'm just going to be using my knife for both. So I have knife, textures, material set up. And so the first thing I'm going to do is just make sure, oh yeah, I'm using Marmoset Toolbag 4. I'm just going to make sure that ray tracing is on. And then I'm going to create a new camera by just duplicating this. But camera 1, making sure we're on camera 1. And then let me walk through my settings. I'm going to pull up another Marmoset on my second tool, or my second monitor, so I can just check all my settings here. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is make sure I've been setting my field of view to 50, which I looked up what like product photography uses. Why can't we? Here we go. So product photography uses lenses that are in the 50mm range, so that's what I've been setting mine to. And I apologize, I'm getting over a little bit of a cold, but I'm just gonna set my depth of field to ray trace, my target to about the midpoint there, and then it really depends on what you're rendering and how close you're getting. And I don't know how this relates to like physical cameras. I just kind of eyeball it, so I usually step down pretty low and then walk it up till feel good. Usually on a profile shot like this, I don't want much of it out of focus. I leave it, I don't like any of it getting real soft. Distortion, let's see. I've been doing this at 0.02 or like just pushing it up a little bit, which just gives a bit of a physical lens idea. And then pulling up my chromatic aberration to 0.032 range. I don't like it being super noticeable, but I want, just a little bit of it somewhere in here. I don't want it to be distracting. I just want it to be like real close to a real camera, but it's just a guess really for me. I'm done enough research to know what you would actually get. You'd probably have to look up a very specific lens and match it. Okay, so here is the big thing. You want to turn your tone mapping to aces. This is a must. Well, in my mind, this will change the tone mapping to something that's more cinematic and contrasted, and it makes the biggest difference. There's two things that will really push your render, this and your sky, and I'll show that to you. So to compensate for this, it's going to make the whole thing darker. So to compensate, you will have to turn up the brightness on your sky. We'll get to that in a second. Let me just make sure that there's nothing else. Let's see, vignette to 0.5-ish, around here. I've been using like digital grain myself, but at a low intensity. And I know a lot of people use like sharpening, and I was using like a low level of sharpening, but honestly, the more I do this, the lower and lower I get my sharpening, and I've honestly been turning it completely off because it just feels like the more it's on, the more digital it feels. Like you look at this, which is obviously too much, versus that, which is very soft. That just feels more physically real to me than that. So I don't know, I just want to get rid of it. That's just a personal choice. You can do whatever you want. So I think that's all for my camera settings. Let's go to sky stuff. So here's the secret, guys. How do you make cool looking renders? First thing, turn on that ACES tone mapping. The second is go buy, let me pull it up. Go to Alex Senchal's marketplace and buy his HDRIs, especially if you're doing weapon stuff, gun stuff. This his packs are the best they nothing else has even compared from what I've seen. They're fantastic. I have both his pack 3 and 2. I have both pack 2 and 3. They're both fantastic. I love both of them. I love using them. It makes all of my work look good. Half of making, like, you've already put a bunch of time and effort into making your model look and textures look great, but to make them actually look good, you need a good lighting. So why not spend, 20 bucks and make your stuff look excellent? So let me pop this open. We can just go through these. I'm just gonna go through like 2. I'm also going to turn this to just a solid color because I don't want to be distracted by the background. I'm just gonna put it on a flat dark gray. And I'm just gonna go through and just find one I like. I will probably end up like playing with the brightness on some of these, but yeah, these are just so good looking. I just love them so much. I won't spend too much time because most of this is just like finding one you really like, which is not really part of this, but I would usually, what I usually do is like find one I like, duplicate the sky, find another one, and then when I'm done, I just like eyeball, and I just look at like, okay, is this one stronger than this one? Delete the one that I don't like until I find one that's like, this is the one I like. So let's just say this was perfect. It's not, but we'll go with it for now. I'm gonna lock my camera and whoop, I should have turned sticky focus on. And honestly, like, you could just find the perfect HDRi and leave it there, and that's often what I do. Sometimes though, there are a few little bits that I want to punch up. Let's say I found one that I really liked, but it didn't have quite the key light I'm looking for. And I'll just go in here and add my manual lights. And you can even come in and looking down here, finding what's working and dialing that in. I won't walk through all the steps, but this is basically what I would do. I'd find an HDRi that I liked from the pack, and then like just punch up certain elements with manual lights. If it even needs it. Often it doesn't. So this setup is pretty simple. Let's move on to a second, and for reference, let's pull that up again. This kind of setup. So my idea was I started looking at like real knife photography because there's lots of examples out there. And I found some ones that I really liked. And most of them were kind of like this, or they just had like, that would load. They kind of just had this like setup. And it's like outside in nature. It has some like naturey elements, and I really liked that. I like the composition of them. I like just how it framed the knife in that environment. I wanted to kind of recreate that idea. But I didn't want to spend all the time to model all that stuff. So I got some assets from Megascans. All right, so I got some assets from Megascans, which is a great resource to find textures, like photoscan textures and assets. So the first thing I did is found this nice tree stump. Let me open up the textures. All right, so one thing you need to be aware of as you start like downloading and using really high res assets is that your VRAM will start being eaten up, and you will the program will start slowing down or crashing. So you just have to be careful. Some good things to keep in mind is like you can always turn this to draft quality, or like albedo, or even wireframe as you're just navigating. And when you render, it will go into full quality mode. It will spit out a full quality, so you don't have to worry about that. Um, so if you're experiencing lots of those things, try to keep it in a different mode. So here's the folded knife. Oh, let me show you displacement real quick because it took me a minute to figure out. If you've never done displacement in Marmoset, the first thing you need to do is go inside of your object to the mesh, turn on subdivide, and then I usually go to PN triangles, and I will show you in wireframe mode what this does. So if you start turning up the subdivision levels, it's going to add geometry, and depending on how close you're getting and how many triangles and like how much detail you'll want to turn this up. But you got to make sure, you got to keep in mind that like it's going to get pretty heavy as you turn this up. Because I'm getting like super close to this stump though, I'm going to turn it up pretty high. And I mean, an option would have been to like take this asset in Blender or Maya, cut out just the top so it's not as heavy. I happen to also be taking some other shots around other parts of the stump, so I kind of wanted the whole thing. So that's something to keep in mind though, is you could just cut up your asset. Usually I stuck, for most of these things, just like a subdivisional level 2 was fine, but because I'm zooming in at such a close part of this stump specifically, I turned it up pretty high. So let me show you what's going on. So we can turn displacement on and off, and it's looking pretty funky. So I'm just going to turn the scale down. One thing, if you're playing with the displacement map and you notice like your whole mesh is shrinking or like ballooning, that's when you need to play with the scale center. But for this one, you'll notice that the whole thing isn't going one direction, so setting it to 0.5 works. So let me turn this down to 0, and then it isn't doing much, but you can tell like kind of in the cracks and stuff, it's accentuating those. Before I get too distracted setting up other props and stuff, the first thing I really did was set up my lighting. So let's go through that real quick. I didn't want more artificial studio setup that is my other kind of rendering. But so for this one, I went and found or had an HDRi of like nature. Can't remember where I found it or where it came from, but I had it. So here it is, and it gives definitely more of just a softer and more natural light. The things I was really looking for was just complementing the subject really well. I really wanted just this part of the clip to be highlighted. It has some just nice geometry there. So when I found this kind of angle, I was pretty happy with that. So then I went and started adding objects from Megascans. Yeah, I found some just other things. I, just either browsing the store or the bridge. I was just looking for, I could just look through and I was just like browsing, finding like, okay, what would work here? With, found the stump, and then like going through plants and things. I looked for, pine cone. Pine cones are cool. I guess it doesn't have it. One thing I have noticed, oh, no, there we go. I was gonna say one thing I have noticed, I don't even think that's the one I got. I have noticed that like the bridge doesn't have all the assets that like their website does. Don't know why. This isn't Pinecone's one that I got. So yeah, keeping that in mind, I'm not sure. But let's load up that stuff. All right, so basically what I would do is I'd bring in like an FBX, which would have a bunch of and then I would load up a new material with all textures. Let me lock my camera and sky because I'm happy with it, and go to the render tab. I can see my fully rendered composition and start playing around with objects. Yeah, so I didn't really match like a specific reference, but I just like found some things that I liked and started playing around with the composition. I knew I wanted some like objects that were close to camera, some that were further away. Also, the great thing is, while I can play with scale if I want to, I know that like I modeled my knife to the correct scale. All these objects are coming in at correct scale. So everything should be working pretty well together without having to play with scale much. So yeah, I'm just looking to balance the image out, provide some interest and some depth. I don't want to distract, but I want to complement my piece. I'm not going to spend too much time making sure this stuff isn't clipping through. As long as you can't see it clipping on camera, then it's fine. And since most of it is out of focus, not that big of a deal. Also, while the background really isn't in view, one thing I did want to make sure is that if I did get part of the background in view, I wanted to be able to have, unlock the sky. I wanted it to look natural. So if I got a camera shot like this or whatever, it would look like we're still in this kind of nature setting. I think I am going to play with displacement on this pinecone specifically, just because it is in focus. All right, so I wanted to have a leaf or two in, and I found some nice leaves. The problem was, whoa, they have a weird material on them. I'll get that fixed while I talk. So the problem was that it was, it was a big clump of leaves. They weren't broken up. So it was hard to control. It was hard to, I didn't want all of these leaves. They're, more meant for like a game to have scattered around. So I just went in Maya and cut out a few individual ones that I liked. And I am going to turn subdivisions on for this. Get a little bit more of clean geometry. So one thing I noticed was just this was too bright. So I liked the color of it, but thought it was just a little bit distracting. So I literally just duplicated out this material, applied it to the leaf, make sure right leaf, and brought the color of it down. Could have adjusted it in Photoshop, but this was just an easier way of me accomplishing that. It just immediately brought the focus back from the leaf to the knife to make sure that's the focal piece. And so I did that with a few things too. I think I might have done that to like the pine cones, and I would just, you know, recommend that to you. Make sure you're playing around with the colors and stuff if you need to pull the focus towards your knife, or you know, towards your subject. So you kind of get the idea here. I would go on to add more objects like these twigs. Just adjusting, and maybe this isn't the exact twig, but like making sure what I was bringing in was high quality and not distracting. And then let's see, let's go through some final checks to make sure my camera and stuff is set up right, and we'll be good to go. So I'm just gonna go in and like play with my depth of focus, make sure just like getting what I want here, which is to include enough details but not make them the focal piece. Do the same thing with my vignette. There we go. I was just doing test renders. I would render it out at 1080p, but on the final I would go in here and just turn this up a notch to next step. So there's one last thing I did, which let's grab this, the clipboard, and open it up in Photoshop. Okay, yeah, so that's one thing to keep in mind. You got to make sure when you do render to clipboard that I feel like it's always random which viewport it captures in, so I always go back to classic and render to clipboard. This is a good way to show the difference between the linear color profile and ACES. Just look at what just color profile and some better camera settings are going to be doing for you. Fantastic. All right, so the last thing I did was just pop open the levels, go to auto options. I think I looked through these and I ended up going with just enhanced monochromatic contrast. Just to see what it did, and it's subtle, but I did like that I just like the little bit of push that it does, and that's basically where I ended up. Obviously there was a lot more back and forth and polish and just like making sure everything looked perfect, but that's how I ended up with this.